Don't call me ambassador now. I'm not used to that name anymore. My name is Billy Goat. That's my trail name. When you're on the Appalachian Trail, everyone gets a trail name, and you can't assign it to yourself. You have to have somebody else give it to you. And so it was my wife, Nancy, my trail angel, along with our daughter, trail name Chickadee, who gave me that name after a hike that we did on the Potomac River very early on. I think Laura, our daughter's first hike. So Billy Goat. It had nothing to do with the way I climbed, nothing to do with the way I smelled, although I assure you, on the Appalachian Trail, I smelled. So our last speaker last week was Jane Violet. And she told a story that I liked. She talked about how when she moves to a new community, the first thing she does is she goes to the library and gets a library card. And Nancy and I do the same thing. We get our library card and we encourage others to do the same. And we're very proud that our 3-year-old grandson, Lukey, our 4th grandson, already has a library card and uses it to check out books. So it wasn't a surprise when Nancy and I sponsored an Afghan refugee family who was coming here from Afghanistan, that the first thing we did was what? We brought them to the library. And we helped them get their library card. We showed them how to sign on to the Wi-Fi. We showed them how to check out books. And conveniently, they had books in English Dari. We showed them, and we explained to them that the library is a safe place. If they ever feel unsafe, it's a safe place. But most importantly, we introduced them to the librarians. And we explained to them, these wonderful people will help you answer your questions and help you become Americans. I was going to ask if there are any librarians amongst us. Hey, yes. Round of applause for her and her colleagues. Thank you for what you do. So today I'm going to talk about a book that you can check out at the local library. And it's a book by John Muir, America's greatest naturalist. And so I'm going to talk about John Muir, the author. I'm going to talk about his book, My First Summer in the Sierra. And I'm going to talk about what he inspired me to do, and that was to walk a trail named for him twice, once with our daughter. So first, let's talk about John Muir. Does anyone here know somebody who would purposely charge a 500-pound bear to see how it would react? Would Charlie do that? He might. Do you know anyone who would spend hours in a pine tree to see what the wind felt like? That was John Muir. That's what he did. He was quite the character. He was born in 1838 in Scotland. He immigrated with his parents to the United States when he was 11. At the University of Wisconsin at Madison, he took his first lesson in botany, and he later wrote, I quote, "This fine lesson charmed me and sent me flying to the woods and meadows in wild enthusiasm." When it comes to nature, enthusiasm is what defines John Muir. He was enthusiastic about everything he did. He was an enthusiastic walker. When he was 29, he walked 1,000 miles from Kentucky to Florida. And he slept 5 nights outside of Savannah in the Bonaventure Cemetery. I think he didn't have money, basically. And he admired our live oaks with enthusiasm, as you might imagine. So in 1868, at the age of 30, he moved to Northern California. From there, he went to Yosemite, walking, of course. And he wrote of his first visit, "Never before had I seen so glorious a landscape, so boundless an affluence of sublime mountain beauty." Who here has been to Yosemite before? Okay, a lot of people. It's gorgeous, isn't it? It is beautiful. This should go on your bucket list for those who didn't raise their hands. In 1869, he took a job helping to shepherd 2,000 sheep to the upper meadows of the High Sierras, of California High Sierras, the mountains that were around Yosemite. And he later told the story in the book that we'll be talking about later on this morning. Muir was enchanted by the High Sierra and Yosemite at its heart. The craggy peaks of the High Sierra range 400 miles north-south and 700 miles east-west in central California near Nevada. Spanish explorers named it the Sierra Nevada for the snowy peaks, but John Muir called them the range of light for the way that sunlight played upon the mountains. While he wasn't a scientist, he became an expert on the geology, flora, and fauna of the High Sierra. A prominent geologist, with his PhD, well respected in the field, had declared that Yosemite and the Sierras were formed by a giant earthquake. John Muir disagreed, and he demonstrated successfully how they were he argued successfully how they were actually carved out by glaciers. This explains the jagged peaks, the high ridges, the U-shaped basins, all of it ancient granite that was exposed by erosion and polished and sculpted by ice. Muir became a vocal and widely published advocate of the Sierra and other wild spaces in the United States. He argued for treating all wilderness as sacred places to be protected for humanity and not exploited. In 1892, he co-founded the Sierra Club. He did this to, in his words, do something for wildness and make the mountains glad. Do something for wildness and make the mountains glad. He was the Sierra Club's president until 1914 when he passed away. In 1903, Muir took Teddy Roosevelt camping for 3 nights in Yosemite. He helped convince the president that Yosemite and later on other places like the Grand Canyon deserved federal protection. Muir is known, as you may know, as the father of our national parks. So let's talk now about his book. Sorry. My First Summer in the Sierra. It's a tale of adventure and discovery. It follows John Muir and his companions, a shepherd, a dog, a St. Bernard, a Native American, as they herd sheep up into the mountain meadows around Yosemite and in the mountains overlooking Yosemite. It's an adventure book. Sheep are killed. They run out of food. There are bears that eat sheep. All that happens. But most importantly, this is John Muir's first opportunity to discover the beauty and wonder of the High Sierra. Muir published this book when he was in his 70s. So 40 years later, this allowed him to combine the enthusiasm from his youthful discoveries with the wisdom and writing skill that he acquired as he aged. Many consider it Muir's best book, and it's certainly his most enduring. Rather than describing the book, allow me to quote it. Listen to Muir's delight as he climbed the foothills of the Sierra. We are now in the mountains, and they are in us, kindling enthusiasm, making every nerve quiver, filling every pore and cell of us. He described the cumulus clouds that form at midday as sky mountains. No rock landscape is more varied in sculpture, none more delicately modeled than these landscapes of the sky. On the wind, he wrote, how gently the winds blow. They seem the very breath of nature, whispering peace to every living being. On the Yosemite and Tuolumne rivers, Muir wrote, a more tuneful set of streams surely nowhere exists, or more sparkling crystal clear, now gliding with tinkling whisper, now with merry dimpling rush, in and out through sunshine and shade, shimmering in pools, uniting their currents, bouncing, dancing, from form to form over cliffs and inclines, ever more beautiful the further they go until they pour into the main glacial rivers. Almost poetry there. You can hear the streams. On being in the wilderness, he wrote simply, this is true freedom, a good practical sort of immortality. On the unity of nature, he wrote, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. One fancies that a heart like our own must be beating in every crystal and cell. And we feel like stopping to speak to the plants and animals as friendly fellow mountaineers. Muir's philosophical observations recall Ralph Waldo Emerson, whom Muir read, admired, and once hosted in the Sierra. My favorite pages in the book describe the Douglas squirrel. Now, somebody here admitted to reading the book. Who has read the book? Did you love the description of the Douglas squirrel? It was a very difficult read. We'll talk about that. So the Douglas squirrel is, in his words, the brightest of all the squirrels I have seen, a hot spark of life, making every tree tingle with his prickly toes, a condensed nugget of mountain vigor and valor. He seems to think the mountains belong to him, and at first tried to drive away the whole flock of sheep, as well as the shepherd and the dogs. How he scolds and what faces he makes, all eyes and teeth and whiskers. If not so comically small, he would indeed be a dreadful fellow. I've met these rascals in the High Sierra. They are rascals. Two scolded me because I erected my tent in their territory, and they were unhappy about that. And when I refused to move the tent, one of them climbed on a limb over the tent and started throwing pine cones at it. So we heard the book can be a bit, I've read good parts of the book. There are other parts that can be a little tedious. When he talks about his favorite tree, he'll kind of go on and on and on and on, right? Yeah. It's okay if you read the book, if you kind of skip over those parts. I probably have myself. But you have to read every word about the Douglas squirrel. It's the highlight of the book. So my first summer in the Sierra overflows with Muir's joy and love of Yosemite in the Sierra, and it explains why he became their foremost advocate. So let me talk now about my two hikes on the trail that's bearing his name that he helped inspire me to do. This hike, the John Muir Trail, was completed in 1938 with something called the Golden Staircase. Carving these switchbacks to complete the trail into the granite took lots of dynamite brought in by pack mules. Here the trail goes up 1,700 feet in just a short distance and exhausts many a hiker. The John Muir Trail itself starts up in Yosemite Valley, in Yosemite National Park, and it goes 211 miles all the way down to Mount Whitney, which is the highest point in the continental United States. It goes through three national parks and two national wildernesses. It goes through Yosemite, then it goes through Ansel Adams National Wilderness, it goes through John Muir Wilderness, it goes through Kings Canyon, and then it goes through Sequoia National Park. And it takes usually about 3 weeks to complete the hike. It can be more or less, but that's about how long it took my daughter and myself to do it. Now, for a hiker, the more important chart is this one here that shows the elevation. This is a little exaggerated, so take that into account. But you can see you start in Yosemite Valley at 4,000 feet, and you end up on Mount Whitney, way over there, at over 14,000 feet, 14,500 feet. And you go over 6 passes that are over 11,000 feet. The air gets pretty thin up there. So the 6 passes is Donahue Pass, and then all these passes down here. People usually go this direction because you slowly get used to the height. Otherwise, altitude sickness can be a real problem. In fact, I got altitude sickness. I was in good shape, but the first time we hiked, we went all the way up here, and then we went off trail a little bit higher. And a couple of days later, I was kind of shot. It was tough. I needed some time off the trail. So, the air does get thin at that height, and how much you go up and down is important. By the way, the total elevation gain on this trail is 47,000 feet. So that's like the equivalent in 3 weeks of walking up 4,700 flights of stairs. So you can imagine, your legs get in pretty good shape doing that. So I've had the opportunity to do it twice. The first time was in July 2019. I did all 211 miles with our daughter Laura, whose trail name is Chickadee. So you have Billy Goat and Chickadee there. And then 6 months ago, I did it again just for you guys. I did the first 2/3 on my own. Fortunately for me, I was better equipped than John Muir was. He had a heavy rucksack. I had lightweight gear. This is my backpack. This is my shoes, my hiking poles and so forth. Okay, who here has been in the Army or Marine Corps? Okay, how heavy was your rucksack when you hiked? 65 pounds, okay. This thing filled up with 5 days worth of food and a bunch of water, never weighed more than 30 pounds. Could you imagine how easy that makes? You hike someplace, you have to stop to catch your breath, you don't even have to take it off. But to get it that lightweight, I would make my wonderful wife, Nancy, laugh, because I would do things like I would take my toothbrush and I would cut the end off. I mean, who needs the end of a toothbrush? And it probably weighs half an ounce. Who wants to carry that? I also had satellite communications because most of the trail, it's truly in the wilderness. Your cell phone didn't work. And Nancy and our daughter said, hey, Dad, if you're going to go out there by yourself, you better have SATCOM. So I had SATCOM so I could send short messages to Nancy and back while I was gone. I also had Wes told me this might happen. I also had a solar charger, which kept that charged and kept my iPhone charged. Worked quite well. There was plenty of sun there. I also had an app on my iPhone. And this app, I had physical maps, of course, but this app would tell me where I was specifically, and it would also tell me, more importantly, how much further to the next uphill. In fact, I usually watched that one, the uphill and downhill, as opposed to that one there. I had an easy way to filter water. These are 2 different filtration types. This one here, you take the top off, you scoop it in the water, put it on, you just drink through there and it filters it for you. This one here, to filter more, you get water out of a stream, it goes through a filter, it comes down here and fills up that, and you got a bunch of clean water. Don't want to get Giardia and have something like that wreck your trip. I also had a lightweight tent, a quilt that was super lightweight but kept me very warm when it got cold at night. I had a mattress pad that made things comfortable for me so my old bones could fall asleep. And I had decent food. John Muir, when he went out, usually ate bread. He filled his pockets full of bread and he had tea. I had a variety of dehydrated meals. I could heat up water, put it in that bag, stir it up with my spoon. Oh, by the way, a titanium spoon, which is lightweight, and then use it to eat it. And once in a while, if I went crazy, I would have a charcuterie or even an avocado, although it slightly insulted me to carry the pit. I mean, because the avocado pit, that's probably an ounce right there, but it was worth it when I would eat it. I also had the opportunity for resupply. This is in our house. That's like 7 days worth of food. It all went into that Graco bucket. Free advertising for Graco there. Mailed it, postal service. Then it was brought by all-terrain vehicle out to this little cabin at the midpoint of the John Muir Trail. And here I was able to pick it up and refill and restock my pack so I'd have food to continue. Now all this food, there are bears out there. And so you're required to put all your food into these canisters here, bear canisters. This is one, that's my daughter, Laura Chickadee, and my trail name's Billy Goat. My trail name's Billy Goat, so she had very nicely made a little billy goat and put it on the side there. We never saw a bear, but we saw lots of marmots. And I tell you, if you weren't protecting your food, those marmots were definitely going to eat it. So it's time to start out on the trail. It's hard to get a permit for the trail, but I managed to get one. So here I am picking up my permit, picking up my bear canister, and I'm getting ready to head off on the John Muir Trail. Let me talk about some of the highlights. The first highlight was Half Dome. Those of you who've been to Yosemite, I see heads nodding, have seen Half Dome. It is spectacular. It rises nearly a mile from the Yosemite Valley floor to the very top, and it dominates the place, along with El Capitan and others, but Half Dome. And the first day, you hike up, you go by Vernal and Nevada waterfalls, and you come up, and then if you get another permit, what I did, which I was able to do, you go up here to the very top. But to get up here, it's quite steep. And so the Park Service has these cables, and you pull yourself up the cables, and you wear gloves. You have to bring gloves because otherwise you're going to shred your hands, and you pull yourself up to the top, and you're going 45 degrees up. That's not that bad going up. The scary part is going down. So we made it to the top. There's Chickadee and myself. We have Yosemite Valley in the background there, and the rest of the Sierras all around us. So the next time I went 6 months ago, I thought, hey, let's do something different. Let's go up there at night. So I camped near the base of Half Dome, got up at 4 in the morning, headed off with my headlamp, and climbed these at dark. And you can see up there are already some other folks in front of me with their headlamps going up there. And that let me be up there for sunrise. It was spectacular. Here are these other folks. They look crazy, right? We have one youngster in the audience here. Where'd our youngster go? Where's our youngster? Right there. Stand up, youngster. She would probably do this. Only crazy young people would do this. Sit on the very edge there. And I, of course, took their picture, and I had to ask them what they were up to. And they were working at Yosemite with the concessions there. And they had a day off, and so they thought they'd just climb Half Dome and be there for sunrise. So another highlight was the snow. The first time we went there in July, and even though it was July, every single pass had snow. In fact, we almost didn't get to hike because there had been so much snow. Maybe you've been reading on the news now that there's tons of snow in the Sierra Nevada. I mean, people aren't going to be hiking there until August, probably, with the amount of snow they're getting. But July, every pass had snow. And we wore cleats to make it up there, but that didn't stop you from falling down occasionally. And that didn't stop Laura and myself from occasionally sitting on our backpack and sliding down the slope like a sled. It was good fun. These are called snow cups. And this is what the sun will do to snow. Can you imagine hiking through there? First, it's hard to track the trail. Secondly, it's hazardous. And it's particularly hazardous with all the melting going on, because underneath it, you can often hear big streams of water that have melted. And so if you step in the wrong place, you're going to post hole, which means, I'll try not to fall off the stage, Wes, which means, stepping through it, and you're going to get your leg wet. You could also break it. So a little bit hazardous there. But with all this melting water, the streams were outrageously big. And by the way, they're freezing cold too, not surprisingly, because they're coming right off of the snow. This was a particularly hazardous crossing we're going to show you now. Okay, I hope this runs. So this is we don't have any sound here. This is our daughter crossing over. You see, you maintain 3 points of contact all the time. You unbuckle the belt, because if you fall down, and this is the pass that we just came over. If you fall down, you don't want your backpack sweeping you away. You want it just to sweep away by itself. But she made it over. There's Chickadee. And I made it too, thank goodness. Okay, when I hiked in September, 6 months ago, we were having the first snow of the year. Not a lot of snow, but it was coming down. It made the trail a little bit hard to follow, but snow dominates things around there. Another highlight of the John Muir Trail are the lakes. This is 1,000 island lakes, and you can see 1,000 islands there, and that's Mount Ritter in the background, and there's Chickadee with the lake in the background. Just lake after lake. Here's another beautiful lake we camped next to. You can see Laura in the tent. She's behind the mosquito netting. More on that later. Here's another lake that we camped at. And here's another lake. What's going on, Wes? There we go. Here's another lake at sunrise. Where there's water, there were mosquitoes. You come to these beautiful lakes, you say, oh, what a beautiful place to set up my tent, and then you'd be attacked by a swarm of mosquitoes. So you put more DEET on, you got in the tent, you put on your mosquito netting, you made food fast, and then went in and went to sleep. We were exhausted at the end of the day anyway. Still smiling despite the mosquitoes. Another highlight of the trail were the passes. I mentioned there were 6 of them over 11,000 feet. This is Muir Pass, which is one of the most famous ones. Laura Chickadee is pointing to a little dot up there. That's the hut, the John Muir hut, which is dedicated to him, lover of the range of light. We came up here, and as we got here, a thunderstorm broke out with lightning strikes everywhere. And you're not supposed to stay in that hut if there's lightning because it's a target. We headed down the pass full speed with lightning strikes all around us. It was probably the scariest part of the hike, but we made it out. Here's another beautiful pass. Another beautiful pass. This is Forester Pass at 13,200 feet. Oops, another beautiful pass with the lake in the background. And you see the U shape? That brings me to another highlight of the John Muir Trail, and that's the geology. Any geologists here? No? Okay. If there were, they'd tell you that was formed by a glacier. That U shape is definitely from a glacier. And here, this is Cathedral Peak. This is where the glaciers got about that high, and they didn't polish the top. It was above the glaciers. So all this below is polished, and you'd have these jagged peaks sticking out where the glaciers hadn't rubbed them down. Looks a little bit like the Alps, doesn't it? Well, in fact, they were formed in a similar way, except the Alps had more glaciation, and so they tend to be even steeper. But it did feel a little bit like the Alps there. You had the big boulders deposited there by glaciers, and you had the marks where glaciers had dragged a boulder along the polished granite. You also had occasionally evidence of volcanic activity. This is at Devil's Post Pile. And these 60-foot-long columns were formed by lava that when it cooled into these hexagonal shapes. This is looking from the top. Then glaciers stripped away so you could see it, and then cut off and polished the top. And look at this sort of amazing structure it created there. Nature. Another highlight of the trail was the sky and the tops of the mountains at dawn and dusk. Look at the colors here. This, by the way, this little stream, that's where I sat and cooked dinner and washed my feet and washed my shirt while I watched the sun coming down. Here, we're seeing something that's called alpenglow. And that's when you're up high in something like the Alps, and you have, before dawn or after dusk, you get these beautiful colors all around you. Absolutely spectacular. John Muir talked about the sun kissing the mountains. And can't you just see the sun kissing the mountains in that photo right there? Now, night was equally spectacular. This is a picture taken out of my tent door. And that big light, that's Saturn. And at this time, this was 6 months ago, Saturn was crossing the sky. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, and you could almost see Saturn moving. And it was the first time in my life when I felt the earth turn underneath me. You could just feel the whole earth turning as the whole sky turned over your head. Another highlight were the flowers. We got any experts on flowers in here? Okay, good. I hope I identified them right. These are lupines, my favorite flower. They particularly grew in areas where there had been fires. They would be amongst the first plants that would come in after a fire. So at first you'd see a place that had been burnt. It would be like, oh, this is so sad. But no, look at the beauty that fires bring in. This is Indian paintbrush. And this is monk's hood. They even look like a little tiny monk's hood. And here we have yellow violet. And this one is, I have to check. This one has a weird name I had never heard of before. Beard tongue. But look at the rocks they're growing in. Look at the rock that's growing in. In July, there were flowers everywhere. And even at the highest passes, if there was a rock with a little hole with a little bit of dirt, there would be flowers growing out of it. Another highlight were the trees. John Muir talked about these were the most noblest trees in the United States. These are the sequoias. He called them a noble tree, and he also called them eternal because they never died of old age as far as he could tell. They died if man cut them down, they died of lightning, they died in fires, but they would grow forever. And by the way, guess who loved harvesting the pine cones in these trees? Yeah, our friend, the rascal, the Douglas squirrel. They were the friendly harvester of those trees. A more prevalent tree, probably my favorite tree, is this Jeffrey pine. I could tell it because it had huge pine cones. Its pine needles came in bundles of 3, and its bark was very distinctive. And, believe it or not, it smelled like vanilla. So I could always check if something was a Jeffrey pine just by smelling it. Going up higher, you run into these lodgepole pines. They like to be around mountain lakes. They have a very different bark. The bark is it's like cornflakes. And the cones are teeny. They're about the size of strawberries. And they are very hardy. They could grow out of rocks, and you see this little one growing right out of a crack in a rock. Someday it's going to crack that rock wide open. The last tree here is the western juniper. These you find at higher elevations. John Muir called them the rock tree because they could grow in the rocks with just a handful of soil. Typically, the top was missing from lightning. The limbs were bare at the end. And they survive storms. I mean, look at this tree. Think of the storms that tree has survived through the years. Another highlight were the other hikers out there. This group here is a group of Swiss. Swiss? I asked them, I said, what are you doing here? You guys have the Alps. Why'd you fly all the way here? And they said, well, we have the Alps, which are beautiful like here, but every valley has a village. Every mountaintop has a farmer with cows. Here you're in the real wilderness. These two were girlfriends who were hiking northbound. I was going southbound. I was going from Yosemite down to Mount Whitney. They were going the other direction. These two were a couple. Their trail names were Old Timer. I was slightly insulted because he was so much younger than I am. Old Timer and October. Much to my embarrassment, but I think not theirs, I caught them skinny dipping once. One evening. And here's another group of 4 youngsters I met. These are members of the California Conservation Corps. And they would spend 7 months out in the wilderness. They weren't allowed to come in. They weren't allowed to go into towns or anything like this. And they were the ones who rebuilt and maintained the trails. I was incredibly thankful to them. Okay, one of the last highlights then is going up Mount Whitney. Laura and I woke up at 4 in the morning, headed up. This is looking from the side of Mount Whitney. You can see sunrise there. By the way, we'd been camping down here. It was the highest place we camped, and we woke up in the night gasping for air. Because...
Here's what I found.
Thank you, Siri. Gasping for air because the air was so thin and we weren't used to breathing at that altitude. So we climb up. Laura's all dressed up. It's cold up there. We're heading our way up, and we reach the top. This is the end of the trail, 211 miles, 14,500 feet, and we summited Mount Whitney, and we called up our trail angel, Nancy, and said, we'll be right down now. Well, guess what? It took us like 4 or 5 hours to get down to the real highlight, which was my trail angel, who was waiting at the end for me. Nancy, my trail angel, on my hikes, whether it's this one or the Appalachian Trail, she supports me, she plans for me, she launches me, she picks me up, and she welcomes me home. So anyway, let's wrap up. I guess I'll wrap up by saying, why should you read this book? John Muir walked alongside me every step of the way. He opened my senses to the trees, to the glaciated peaks, yes, the Douglas squirrels. His wisdom about nature gained new meaning as I forded streams and climbed up snowy passes. Reading his book might inspire you to hike the John Muir Trail someday with John Muir at your side. If not, even reading it from your armchair will help you better appreciate the wilderness that he so much loved. And it'll fill you with John Muir's enthusiasm for the outdoors and nature. Let me conclude with a quote from John Muir. And I am now happy to take your questions about the author, about the book, and about my 2 hikes. Yep, I'll get you right back there. Sir.
How did he get to California in 1838?
How did he? No, he didn't walk there. I'm not sure how he got there then. I don't remember. One would have taken railroads by then, I'm guessing, yeah? I don't think he sailed, though. You could sail it then. I don't remember that. Sorry, I don't have a good answer to your question. But he did a lot of walking, but he didn't walk that far. Sir. It's really hard because this is such a spectacular trail. There are a lot of people who want to hike it. And so you have to start like 6 months before applying for a permit. And our daughter and I applied over and over for the permit. It was denied, denied, denied. Only like 7% of the people who apply get a permit. We got a permit because we were ready to go. We had Nancy supporting us. We were ready to go and start at one place, if not another. And in the end, we got a walk-up permit. Somebody canceled and let us go. And then my last trip, I went late enough in the season, I was able to get a permit. But, no, there are no qualifications. You just have to, it's $6, and you just have to apply online. So many people want to do it. And I'm glad because it would ruin the trail if we're full of people. I mean, you could be up there and you might not see that many people in a day, and you might camp with a couple more, but it really kept it the wilderness. Sir. This one right here. When I hike the Appalachian Trail, nowadays, I think if you get a pro, you can take awfully good pictures with these. I got my first iPhone before I hiked the Appalachian Trail because I had a flip phone, and that's all I thought I needed in retirement. And I had a little tiny camera. And Nancy showed me how an iPhone weighed less than my flip phone and little tiny camera. So I got it basically because it was lighter, but then I found there's all sorts of utility in it too. So this was my camera. Other questions, sir?
You touched on almost everything, but he was considered a religious philosopher. And it's all through the diary, his devotion.
You're talking about John Muir? I thought a lot about, was John Muir religious or not? And he was certainly religious in his own way. He talked, in the books, he talked about God creating this. He talks about sacred places. But I had the sense that he was a little bit more Unitarian, maybe, than any other organized religion. That for him, nature was his God. And he was very respectful of that. But I think nature was his God. That was how I interpreted it. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any type of trail markings to ensure that you're on the right passage to where you have to go?
Yeah. Well, first off, this, you can always check your app. But yeah, the trail is relatively well marked. There's something like on the Appalachian Trail, for example, and on this trail, there's something called blazes that are 4 feet by 3 inches, white blazes that you follow. I forget the color on this trail, and you follow them. And if you ever reach a point where there aren't trees and they can't put blazes up, they'll make cairns, and you can follow those. But it was pretty hard to get lost on this trail. And on the Appalachian Trail, I only got lost twice when I was up in the White Mountains, and I sort of headed the wrong way, and then I used my app to get me right back to where I was going. Getting lost was not a big problem. Sir?
So on the trail, there are no real provision stations, except I saw the one picture, it looked like a hut. Was that basically a halfway point, if you will, or was it just a place that maybe receives mail and things like that?
That was something called the John Muir Ranch, and people would go there. To get there, you'd have to go by horseback or by all-terrain vehicle. People would go there and spend a week there or something. Hikers usually didn't stay there, but they were nice enough to receive packages for a fee, so you could pick them up. But basically, when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, you're always pretty close to civilization. You're always crossing the road. There are opportunities for resupply. Here, there are places where you're really in the wilderness. I mean, early on, Nancy launched me with 4 days worth of food. And by the way, you eat the heaviest food first because you really notice the weight. And then we came to Tuolumne Meadows, and Nancy grabbed me, and we had a 0 day, which means I didn't hike that day, and she resupplied me. Then I hiked more, and then she pulled me out at Mammoth, resupplied me, showered me up, put me back on the trail. And from there, had to go practically to the end with no opportunities to resupply except for that one place. And when you show up this place, you're so excited about all this food you're getting. But you saw that food, that weighed a ton. You'd put it on, say, oh, I'm resupplied. No, this is too heavy. I got to start eating this real fast. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
When you hiked the Appalachian Trail, how long did that take?
That's a lot longer. I did the whole thing from Georgia to Maine. This trail was 3 weeks long. The Appalachian Trail was 4 months and 3 weeks. And I went a little faster than most. So it's truly you have to organize your life around it. The average age on the Appalachian Trail is somewhere in the early 30s, but you will find no one in the early 30s on the trail because they're all working or raising families or whatever. It's all young kids, like you, youngster, all young kids sort of, graduating from college or graduating from high school, and then retired people. Not a lot in the middle because, to be able to take that length of time is tricky. And it's a more challenging hike. You don't have the ups and downs. You don't have the high altitude, but just the duration makes it a huge mental challenge. I remember getting to Maine. You go through 14 states. Maine was my 14th state. And I'm like, yay, okay, I'm in Maine. And then I sort of look and it's like, I still have 3 weeks. And towards the end, I just wanted to see Mount Katahdin. I wanted this to be done. And with apologies to all the mothers in the audience who've had babies, I think maybe it's a little bit like that. It's like at the end of a pregnancy, it's like, this is awful. I'm never going to do this again. And 6 months later, I was thinking, okay, when's my next hike? Sir.
So the obvious question is, what's your next hike?
What's my next hike? Okay. So our next hike is, I fortunately have Nancy, who's wonderful, prefers hotels, so I don't get to hike with her. But our daughter, Chickadee, loves hiking. And she has a wonderful husband who takes care of her 3 kids while she goes hiking with me. So our next hike is, if we get the permit, it's around Mount Rainier in Washington State. It's called the Wonderland Trail. It's 90 miles, and you do it in about 9 days. And here's the exciting part. She doesn't know it yet, but our number 2 granddaughter, Ashley, who's 10, we're going to invite her to come with us. And she's going to love it. This is going to be really exciting for her. Sir? Birds. Charlie, you're supposed to ask that question about birds. The birds moved too fast for me to get pictures of them. My favorite bird, well, yes, there were birds. My favorite bird, or one of the birds I liked the most, was called Clark's nuthatch. And it was discovered by Clark of Lewis and Clark back in 1803. And these must have been related to those Douglas squirrels, because they would just scold you and yell at you when you got nearby. And I remember one time I was obviously hiking a part of the trail that they thought they owned, and one of these nuthatches started dropping nuts on my head, which made me hike a little bit faster, actually. So there were those. John Muir's favorite bird was called the water ouzel, O-U-Z-E-L, which is also known as the American dipper. And it's a little bird that lives around streams, and it likes to live in the waterfalls. And you could be sitting near a little stream with a little waterfall, and the water ouzel will be jumping around through the waterfall, diving in water, getting food, and it sang just like the spring sang. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. By the way, Charlie, who I keep on picking on back there, Charlie Holbrook, who's Data's birding expert, tells me that you only see Clark's nuthatches over, what'd you say, 10,000 feet?
You're at 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains or whatever, they sort of find you.
Yeah.
You get out of your car and they sort of pecking at you, screaming at you, you know. You're also looking for handouts too.
Yeah.
The bird is sort of deceiving because it reveals itself.
And they were noisy. They scolded me. Other questions?
One last question.
Yeah, were you working when you were doing all this?
Oh, no. No, I was, this was after I retired. I was, to do like the Appalachian Trail, it would be awfully hard to organize work around, yeah, boss, I'm going to take, 4 months, 3 weeks off. That's a little hard to organize. So just to wrap up with a final story about my trail angel. I never knew I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. I'd hiked bits of it when I worked in Washington, D.C., and we had Virginia nearby in Shenandoah National Park. I'd hiked a lot of that. And I suddenly thought, maybe I should hike the Appalachian Trail. So I went to my wonderful wife and I said, sweetheart, I'm thinking next year, maybe I hike the Appalachian Trail if you agree. And my sweetheart looked at me and said, well, how long does that take? And I said, it can take 6 months. And she looked at me and she said, you're going to abandon me for 6 months? And I thought, okay, I guess I'm not hiking the trail. But then the next day she said, okay, you can do it, and I'm going to be your trail junkie. And she was. She launched me at Springer Mountain. She picked me up at Mount Katahdin. She met me 9 times along the way, pulled me off the trail, washed me up, restocked me, sent me on my way, tracked me, dehydrated food that she sent to me. I mean, she was truly my trail angel. I couldn't have done it without her. So.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.